Okay, so here we have the GH4 and the GH5. Now this video isn't going to be a full review of either camera. It's going to be specifically for those of you that have maybe either had the GH4 for quite a while and you're considering upgrading to the GH5 and you want to know whether it's worth it, or it's for those of you that are buying one of these cameras and you want to know, should I save a bunch of money and buy a second-hand GH4, or should I get the GH5? Is it really worth the difference? And I'm not going to be going into sort of, battery duration lengths or form factor or any of that kind of stuff. What I'm going to be looking at is what I'm interested in, which is the image quality for video, the differences between these two, specifically the ISO performance and noise performance, low light. Now, neither of these cameras are low light cameras, so don't buy them if you want it for that, but if you want to know what the differences are and the advantages of the GH5 are over the GH4, then hopefully that will be useful for you. I also want to look at the slow motion VFR options and where is the kind of the cutoff point. When does the GH5 start looking like crud? Now I've already done tests on the GH4 and I determined that it really wasn't worth shooting VFR on the GH4 slower than 62 frames per second VFR. In my opinion, the 75 and the 96 just look like crap, but the 62 still looks like pretty good quality HD. And we're going to do some tests on the GH5 now and find out where the cutoff for that is. Also do a quick test on the IBIS just to figure out how much, how great that is. I've heard very good things, so we're going to do a quick test on that as well. But this is mainly about image quality differences between one camera and the other, and at what point do things start looking like shit. Now I'm going to be using the same lens on both cameras for this test, and this is the Nocticron 42.5mm 1.2, which is about the best quality micro four thirds lens as you can buy, basically. So the lens will not be the will not be the weak point in this testing. They're both going to have a level playing field and having the same lens on it. Now I do have Metabones XL speed booster and lots of other lovely lenses, and I'm not going to be including those in the test, but what I'll do is I'll do a couple of tests myself, and if I find any problems using the XL speed booster with my GH5, then I'll put that into the end, just flagging any issues that you may want to look out for. Okay, so let's get on with some testing. Okay, so the first thing you should know is that I went and got a bunch of test clips, test shots with the GH5 and the GH4. Obviously, the first thing I went to is the highest possible quality coming out of the GH5 in terms of the 4K 10-bit. And now I basically cannot use those files, so I've switched over to the 8-bit. Now I'm running a iMac, which is i7. It's a few years old now, but it was top of the range when it came out. It's still brilliant. I have no problems using it with 4K and very heavy work. And basically Premiere Pro crashes every time I try to do anything with the 10-bit files. I'm sure this is something that can be updated and will get fixed with down the line, but I've got the very latest version of Premiere Pro running as of the 31st of May 2017, just updated it this morning, and yes, it can't handle it, and I also can't preview the files just in QuickTime or anything like that. So 10-bit, I had heard about this previously before, but yeah, 10-bit is still an issue, certainly on a Mac and certainly using Premiere. I'm sure if you're using something else, you might be okay, but bear that in mind. All these tests are now going to be done with the 8-bit because I could not use the 10-bit files, and I tried. Okay, let's get on with some ISO tests. Okay, so let's look at some side-by-sides for the ISO test here. We have the GH4 on the left and GH5 on the right, and we're just going to run through the ISO range, stop at a time, starting at 200 to 400 to 800 to 1600, 3200, maxing out at 6400 on the GH4, and then going up to 12,800 on the GH5. Now keep a close look at this area right here. And that should show any sort of noise in the shadows there. I focused on the little cross in the middle of shot right there, and I got the cameras as closely matched as possible in terms of profile and all the rest of it. So here's 7 seconds of each ISO range, and then I'll show you a close-up of the shadowed area, so we can really get a look at the noisy areas of the shot. Okay. And here they are at 200%, just looking at that nasty shadowed bit at 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, and at 12,800. Okay, I'm sure you can come to the same conclusion as me from looking at those tests. The GH5 is better than the GH4, and there is less noise. It's not like a huge, massive difference. You know, it's no A7S2, but I would say it's about almost one stop cleaner than the GH4. So the 800 in the GH5 kind of looks like the 400 in the GH4. So yeah, nearly one whole stop of less noise. Okay, so let's now have a look at the 4K slow-mo or VFR options for the GH5. So if we start off at the highest quality, that's the 150 megabits 4K 50p. And basically, remember, I'm playing this in a 25p timeline. Obviously, it would be very similar in a 24 cinema timeline, but I work in PAL, so it's 25p. And all I've done here is basically I'm playing it back at half speed, so you get 50% slow motion. So that's what that looks like. Then the next one down is our VFR, or basically 4K 25p. If we start with VFR off, so we're in the VFR section, but we've got it turned off and it's just playing back at normal speed. This is what it looks like at normal speed for quality comparison. Now if we have a look at the same category but VFR turned on, now this is at 30 frames per second, so it's ever so slightly slower than normal speed. Now if we have a look at the same section, VFR 4K but at 37 FPS, again this looks great. And finally our last option for 4K slow-mo in the GH5 is 60 frames per second. And again this looks absolutely great. So let's have a look at them all side by side. Now I focused on the bike. So this, the bike in theory should be pin sharp, and I've had a real pixel peep. Now this is 150% in 4K, so we're having a slight close-up look, but as you can see there, they all look incredibly similar. So in my experience, if you want to choose any of the 4K slow-mo VFR options, or just 50p or 60p and play that back at half speed in your timeline, depending on what country you're in, I just think they all look brilliant, and there's no massive priority of choosing one over the others. So I'm probably going to be choosing VFR 60 in my 4K 100 megabit option for pretty much all my slow-mo, because it looks lovely. So that's a big thumbs up. Now let's have a look at the 1080 slow-mo options. If we start off at highest quality again and work our way down, so first of all you have 50p, which is basically recording in normal speed 50p in camera, but again I'm slowing down the clip in the timeline to 50% of that, so it plays back at 50% slow motion. Now that looks lovely, that's lovely and clean 50p. And then if we come down to our VFR options, now if we start at 50 again, now as you'd expect that looks pretty much identical to the 50p, it's the same frame rate after all, you just don't have audio included and it's doing the slow motion for you in camera. Now if we progress on, now the next step is our 62 frames per second. Now I think I'm going to start to disappoint a lot of GH5 owners now, but I'm finding that after 60p, if you're an NTSC, as soon as you get to 62 frames per second in the GH5 in 1080, it really starts to look quite bad. And I'd even go as far as to say is I think the GH4 is slightly better. We'll come back to a side-by-side of the GH4, GH5 at 62 at the end, but let's progress on through the frame rates for now. Then we come down to our 75 frames per second, which looks pretty much the same as 62. It's a little bit jaggy, a little bit claggy, a little bit moire, a little bit of pattern going on, but it's about the same. And then 87 again is pretty similar. It's a pretty similar kind of deal. And then as soon as we get to 100, it's really starting to get to soften up even further. And we get to 125. Once again, it's just ever so slightly worse. And then when we get to 150, it really starts to bottom out, and this is starting to look really quite nasty now. It's got lots of jaggies, lots of softness, lots of mushiness and patterns and moire. and it's pretty much the same deal for 75 but worse, and the same deal for 180 but slightly worse again. So yeah, there we go. So if we have a look at our GH5 62 frames per second full HD compared to our GH4 62 frames per second 1080. Now, I would say that the 62 frames per second in the GH4 was actually the sweet spot. That was the best slow-mo option you had, in my opinion, from my testing. So, I'm putting the best of the GH4 against, the GH5, one of the frame rates, one of the many frame rates. But I would say that there's no doubt that the GH5 has slightly more detail in it, but there's a lot less jaggies, and it's actually a cleaner HD out of the GH4. And if you sharpened this image up in post, after it's out of the camera, you'd actually have a nicer looking HD 62 frames per second out of the GH4 than what you would out of the GH5. Now, don't get me wrong, the 50p and the 60p looks great out of the GH5, but any of the VFR options slower than 62 or slower, they all look quite bad. So I'm sorry about this, but it's just what I'm finding from these tests, and as you can tell, they're pretty controlled tests. So yeah, so that's my opinion. I think the 4K 60p and the 4K slow motion options are gorgeous in the GH5. So if you're buying it for that, go ahead. That stuff looks really nice. We're very lucky to have that in a camera at this price point. It really is fantastic. But if you're buying it for the very high VFRs like 100, 150, 180, I would say don't do it. It doesn't look very good. It looks like it's pixel binning. You would get a lot of Moire. You'd get a lot of jaggies on high contrast edges. It starts to look quite mushy, and it's not giving us what we want, and not for very high quality HD. Like I say, 50p is fantastic, 60p is fantastic. Anything 62 and slower in terms of more slow motion but higher frame rate, don't do it. It's not looking great. So I'm sorry guys, but this is what I'm finding. So if you're happy with your 62 frames per second in your GH4, don't upgrade to get the high VFR 1080 out of the GH5. There you go. Okay, let's have a look at something else. Okay, so here's a quick couple of stabilisation tests comparing the GH4 with a couple of different lenses. One lens that's a native lens with IS, and also a Metabones speed booster with a Sigma lens on it which has no IS, just so you get an idea of what the extra in-body stabilisation can give you when it's combined with an IS lens and when it's just by itself. I chat away through the video, so you should be able to figure out what's going on from that. Okay, so this is the GH4 with the stabilisation turned off on the Nocticron, handheld, and we'll try a pan across and a pan across. Now I'm going to turn the stabilisation on, and a pan across, and a pan across. Okay, this is the GH5 with the stabilisation turned off, handheld, and we'll do a pan across, and a pan across. Now I'm going to turn the stabilisation on, and pan across, and pan across. Sigma and the Metabones, handheld with the stabilisation turned off, pan across, pan across. Okay, I'll turn the stabilisation on. Okay, so here's the GH5 with the speed booster and Sigma, the stabilisation turned on, and pan across, and pan across. Here's a quick moire check on the GH5. Now, because the sensor is now scaling down from more pixels than is needed, there is probably more chance of getting moire on the GH5 than what there was on the GH4, which was reading pixel for pixel off the lower res sensor with that 4K crop as well. So here's a couple of quick tests using the lawn chairs as a subject, because they're quite sort of grid-like and prone to moire. Certainly tighter grids may prove more problematic, but I noticed that they're a bit of an issue, so I thought they're worth checking. And I also wanted to see if the 4K sensor crop, which you now have as an option in the GH5, which you never had in the GH4, whether that helps or not. I still am undecided on this one, but watch this and then you can decide for yourselves. GH5, looking for moire. With the Sigma, and this is now the 4K that's punched in. Okay, so what have I learned after my long days testing with the GH5? First of all, the 4K, the standard 4K looks lovely, as you would expect. I wouldn't say it was like a huge difference over the GH4. It looks very similar, in fact, but it looks lovely, so there's no complaints there. The 4K VFR going up to 60 frames per second is really nice, and I will be using that lots. If you're the kind of person that really wants to add something special to your shots, I think that will be a big boon. Certainly I'm going to enjoy using it. In terms of the Full HD VFR slow-mo, to be honest with you, I'm pretty let down with what we're getting here. It's quite claggy and sort of mushy, and it's not. I mean, yeah, it is an improvement over the GH4. There's no doubt. But it's not a big one. Like, there's not many of those frame rates I would use to get any kind of sexy shots. I mean, sure, if you're just out filming your mate doing some mountain biking or something, and you're not as picky as I am, then you might think all those frame rates are fantastic. But in terms of quality, I don't think it's quite what I was expecting. I was expecting a bigger leap up, so that at least I'd have a very clean 100 frames or 125 frames per second Full HD, and I haven't really got that. I think you do need a different camera if you want very sort of fast high frame rates for slow motion. The ISO performance, so yeah, we're basically getting about one stop cleaner than we are with the GH4. Now, the GH4 was a pretty noisy camera. I mean, I love it to death, but it is a pretty noisy camera. So that doesn't mean that the GH5 is suddenly a low light camera. It's not. It's still going to get really quite noisy quite quickly. But it is nice that if you are working in the perfect ISO, if you are working down at 200 or even down at 100, because you can now sort of undercrank the ISO now on the GH5, then you're going to be getting a cleaner image and you're going to be getting a lot less noise in the shadows. So that is a good thing, but just remember, this is not a low light camera. You would not take this out in bad light and expect to get professional shots, even with a fast lens. I'm sorry, you just won't. You need light for this camera. The IBIS, the stabilisation inside the GH5, is really good, and it is a big plus for those sort of people who use shoulder rigs or just handheld shots a lot. This will up your the quality and the production value of your footage a lot. So it is a big plus. And certainly I've got a lot of very lovely prime lenses that I love to death without image stabilization in them, and it will give them a new lease of life because I will be able to use them handheld and on shoulder rigs and stuff like that. So big thumbs up there. Now the Moire, there is possibly, now I'm not sure about this, I keep changing my mind, to be honest with you, looking at different shots depending on how close I am to grid patterns, but I do think the GH5 is slightly more prone to Moire than the GH4, simply because you're reading from more pixels, and those pixels, as it's being scaled, can clash and give you those kind of nasty patterns on sort of jackets and shirts with that kind of tight pattern. I'm not 100% certain about it, but I do think you probably will get a slightly less moire if you use the punch-in sensor crop. So bear that in mind if you're doing an interview or something and filming someone with a mad suit that's giving you moire. Try that sensor crop, because that might just help you. Now, I'm not 100% on this, but this is my findings from 1 day of testing. And then yeah, so I'm going to be doing some more testing with the GH5 obviously, and I'll be out filming lots of lovely things with it hopefully, and getting some nice sexy edits. So please, yeah, if this was all useful, give me a like and subscribe. And I do hope I provided some valuable information for you today. And okay guys, peace out. I shall see you next time. Bye.